Welcome to Bible Study. This is the Bible study we're preparing for St. Michael's Lutheran Church for August 6th, 2023. We are looking at the Gospel according to St. Matthew, and we're in chapter 14. We're looking at those pieces that come in between the readings that we have. And this week, we actually are going to look at some of the same material we saw last week, but whereas last week we read up to it, this week we want to read forward into the reading that we have here. And particularly, we want to look at the material at the first part of chapter 14 that leads up to the narrative we're going to hear this Sunday. And that is the death of John the Baptist. This is such an interesting story, and it is followed by another very interesting story, in fact, two of them. Jesus feeds the multitudes of people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then Jesus walks on water and invites Peter out of the boat, and Peter walks for a bit with him. These stories are not simply randomly arranged in the New Testament. Matthew is a very careful writer, and he has deliberately paired these episodes with this other material because he's looking to do something to you as a reader as you come to these stories. We believe that Matthew's original audience, the first century audience that he was talking to, was enduring some sort of persecution. Matthew isn't explicit about that. He doesn't say, here's the persecutor, here's what I want to say about them. He really allows the reader to come to that. That's one of the geniuses of these Gospels, is that it allows them to be applied to so many different situations that way. But we believe Matthew's writing to the Jewish Christian audience that had been evicted from the synagogue worship of the traditional Jewish communities. And for them, that was a terrible thing because their entire being was wrapped up in their identity as the chosen people of God, the children of Abraham, and also this community that had been created around the Torah. For them, the idea that following Jesus meant I had to reject my Judaism, or being Jewish meant I had to reject Jesus, was a terrible burden. We probably don't feel that as much today, but they surely did. And yet, people are always being put into that very same conundrum, as we are forced to choose, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in big ways, between following Jesus and listening to someone else. In the death of John the Baptist, we really get the stark reality of what it means to be a persecuted Christian. John has stood up for what is right. The king has broken the marriage of his brother. He has stolen his brother's wife. Herodias she's such an interesting character in here. Matthew and the rest of the gospel writers are very charitable to women, and they're remarkably so in the first century. This is, in fact, the only female villain in all of the gospels. All of the other women that are portrayed in the Gospels are good, except for Herodias and her daughter Salome. Herod has taken his brother's wife. John the Baptist has stood up for what is right, and he has paid the ultimate price. And as we noted earlier, it seemed to be such a random, strange event. Herod didn't want to do it, but as we said, a pretty girl danced and the prophet died. What is one to do in the face of such persecution? That is where our readings this week and next week are going to be calling us. For the death of John the Baptist reminds us all that life is in fact quite tenuous. And our success, our peace, the sense that we have that meaning and purpose and all of those things that we think are integral to our lives are oftentimes very fragile. We see that with John. He's a prophet. You would think if anybody was going to experience the protection of God, it would be John. And yet, for reasons that are just trivial, he ends up dying. So the next two stories call for radical trust in God on the part of God's people. As one contemplates the fragility of life and the frailty of our status as God's people, Matthew calls us to trust in God. In the first story, the feeding of the multitudes, Matthew wants us to be able to say that all sustenance, everything, whether that came from a farm and a farmer and a trucker and a processing place and a grocery store and all those things, that is all coming from the hand of God. As we say in that common table prayer, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord," or "Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest," let these gifts to us be blessed. The acknowledgement that is involved in those prayers we say at meal times is what Matthew is really talking about here. He says, look at John. Even something we need as basic as food, or as Jesus calms the storm and invites Peter out onto the water, and as he walks on the very waves themselves, the forces of nature against which we struggle, things that we might not necessarily associate with God. I mean, we would, but we tend to say, well, we live in this world. God is surely the world of the supernatural and the strange things that are out there that we see in the miracles and all of those things. But no, God is in the rain. And God is the Lord of the storm. God is the Lord of the water, commanding that it sustain even Jesus as he walks across it. And he does. As we come to these next 2 weeks, I think it's really important that you remember that Matthew has placed us into that frame of mind. We are frail. We are subject to forces and to mortal dangers that we have no control over, and which in fact may not make any sense to us. To us, Matthew says, trust in God. Trust that I am the one who controls wind and waves. I am the one who gives you the very things that you need for your life. There's much more to say about that story of Jesus feeding the multitudes and Jesus walking on the water. But Matthew, to his persecuted audience of the first century, seems to also have been asking them, and calling us. In a time when the world wants to tell us, oh, we've got all this figured out. We know why it rains. We know why the wind blows. We know why. Do we? And even if we know, do we really understand that God, the one who made the wind and the waves and the wheat and the barley and all of the things that we would eat, that God is the one who is behind them all? I pray you have a good week. God bless you.